Looking for something to read? Well, these are the books that I've written. Hop on down to the description to find the Amazon links for all 4 of them, and keep your eyes open for more in the future. With that said, on to the video.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and it seems that there's just a little bit of drama going on in the Godzilla fandom right now. And I do mean very, very little. It is a minor issue, at least as far as I've seen. I haven't noticed many people really getting that fixated on it. But just to make sure it stays that way, I'm going to provide my own commentary on this and provide a perspective that will hopefully allow this to pass without it getting blown out of proportion. So, it's not necessarily specific to Godzilla per se, but it does involve someone who has been involved in a Godzilla movie, Aaron Taylor Johnson, who played Ford Brody in the Godzilla 2014 film. What happened is that he did an interview to promote Kraven the Hunter, the movie that will definitively prove that Sony learned nothing after Morbius. And while talking about it, he said something to the effect of that he thought he was done making these kinds of movies, these big summer tentpole kind of films, because he had done his piece with Age of Ultron and Godzilla and whatnot. And then he stated that, to be honest, he didn't quite give a F about those movies. So naturally, the news media has done what they always do and ran with the most sensationalized headline they can based on what he said. Aaron Taylor Johnson admits he didn't give a F about Godzilla and Avengers Age of Ultron. It's everywhere. And of course, the way it's causing drama within the Godzilla fandom is that people who didn't like Godzilla 2014 and didn't like the character of Ford Brody in particular are pointing to that and saying, "Ha, you see, we were right all along, somehow." Yeah. As someone who has advocated that Ford Brody is a good character in the past, I do feel like I probably should say something about this, although I also want to make it clear, I have no particular investment in Aaron Taylor Johnson as an actor myself. I don't hate him, nor do I love him. I think he's a good actor. I don't know if he's good enough to get me into the theater anytime he's in something, but the point of the matter is, I'm looking at this, and I'm not really seeing why it should cause an issue. For starters, let us remember that he's not really talking about Godzilla specifically. If he had singled in just on that movie and said he didn't care, then I can understand why it would be causing a stir within the Godzilla fandom specifically. But he didn't just talk about that. He also mentioned Avengers Age of Ultron. And I think he was also implying some of the other films that he had been in the past that were more genre films, the kind of tentpole movies you normally would see in the summer season. I think he was specifically talking about those and how, well, I mean, yeah, he says that. He thought he was done making those kind of movies, and he mentioned those two because those are two of the biggest ones he ever made. And with that in mind, he's more talking about how he thought he was done with that kind of film as a whole, and now he's back playing a Spider-Man villain in a solo Spider-Man villain movie. Even stating that he didn't really care is not in and of itself that big of a surprise, because there are many actors out there who see doing the tentpole sci-fi nerd kind of film as more of a stepping stone to making real movies than they do as something they're actually passionate about. In fact, we can see an example of this from one of the, if not the biggest film series of all time, Star Wars. Harrison Ford, I think it's no secret by this point, doesn't really care for playing Han Solo. I distinctly remember in one of the multitude of DVD box sets of the original trilogy, there's a behind-the-scenes feature where they're interviewing everyone involved, and when asked what people thought after the first Star Wars movie became the huge hit that it was, Harrison Ford's answer was to say, "My first thought was, all right, now I can work." That's what he was thinking. He did Star Wars because he is friends with George Lucas, obviously. He had been in American Graffiti before as a minor role, but he wanted to be one of the big players. So he took this role in Star Wars figuring, it would at least help him get there sooner. And when Star Wars turned out to be the phenomenon that it was, he was excited because now he could get to make the kind of movies he really wanted to make. Now, I don't mean to imply that he hates Han Solo, but I do think it's pretty clear that Han Solo is not his favorite role. And just to further emphasize that point, let us not forget that, one, he tried arguing with Lucas that Han Solo really should have been killed at the end of Empire Strikes Back, so he didn't have to come for Return of the Jedi. But Lucas said, no, Han Solo's coming back, he survives, and he did Return of the Jedi anyway. And then years later, when The Force Awakens came along, he only agreed to return as Han Solo if Lucasfilm also greenlit a new Indiana Jones movie, because Indiana Jones is a character he does really care about and does like to play. And the Lucasfilm crew said, sure, we'll get right on that, and proceeded to drag their feet until eventually they just couldn't anymore. Unfortunately, they did wind up releasing that film anyway, but that's a whole other can of worms. The point is, Harrison Ford predominantly saw Han Solo as a stepping stone. While I wouldn't say he's dispassionate, he also was not as invested in that character as the many, many Star Wars fans around the world have wound up being. And again, he doesn't hate the character, but it's clear he'd rather play Indiana Jones. And that's just one example. There are plenty of other examples where actors take on the comic book movie or the sci-fi movie or the fantasy, whatever genre you pick, not because they actually like the genre, but because they need a paycheck. They know it's probably going to be successful because it's got a built-in audience. So yeah, they'll do it, and that'll just be another check mark on their resume, if you will. That Aaron Taylor Johnson would view certain movies he did in the past the same way, that is not a surprise to me at all. Moreover, I think we need to remember the context in which this quote is emerging. You may have noticed at this point that Hollywood is on fire. The writers and actors are on strike. The producers are being very strict about not revealing streaming numbers and wanting to be cheap and replace people with AI. It's all a mess. And there is a lot of bad blood between the entertainers and the studio executives. You may have noticed that there are actually quite a few people in entertainment these days who, if they didn't say they were done with the system long before the strikes happened, they're definitely saying it now. Even Zachary Levi, who's considered one of the nice guys in Hollywood, has recently dropped some bombs about what he thinks of the system and where they can stick their summer tentpole movies. So Aaron Taylor Johnson's just another voice on that train. He's not necessarily an isolated case. I think, of course, he's going to be saying something like that. His statement, again, doesn't feel like it's aimed at any specific franchise or role or something. You could very well interpret it as him saying he just doesn't give a flip about the whole system anymore. He doesn't like where Hollywood is. You could even argue that the way he phrased it implies he never did. But all the same, I don't necessarily think that means anything regarding the actual films he mentioned. The thing is, though, who cares whether or not he did like playing in those movies? Just because he wasn't interested in them and he had no investment in them doesn't necessarily change the result of the movie itself. People who didn't like the character of Ford Brody may look at this and try to claim that this somehow vindicates their side, but appeal to authority is a logical fallacy, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend taking that tactic. If you're going to make a case for why Ford Brody is not a good character, base it on the movie itself. Don't base it on, well, the actor who played him didn't like him, so that must mean it's not okay to like him, because that doesn't matter. But anyway, that's just what I had to say about the whole thing. Again, this is a very minor issue. I am making this video not to escalate it, but rather to ensure that it stays minor. So with that in mind, I will end the video here and move on to other things. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.
Thank you all for watching. If you want to see us keep doing what we're doing, you might consider doing all the usual YouTube things, as well as hopping down to the description to find links to DeviantArt, Patreon, Twitter, and links for the different books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Your support is naturally appreciated. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.